What's good, YouTubers and YouTubettes? This is JB Sports, back again with another one. WBC featherweight champion, Gary Russell, aka Mr. Gary Russell, who has a record of 31 wins, 1 loss, 18 KOs, a southpaw out of the DC area, will defend his title against Mark Magsayo, a Manny Pacquiao disciple, who's represented by Sean Gibbons and MP Promotion. This fight will take place this Saturday night on Showtime. Now, Al Heyman, who's putting on this event, needs to do a better job of scheduling these fights, because this fight gonna be going head up with the NFL playoffs, which I believe is a disastrous idea. It's gonna really hurt their ratings. It's going to be interesting to see what type of numbers they produce for this featherweight title matchup. Not only will they be going against the NFL playoffs, but they're going to be going up against UFC 270, featuring 2 of the best heavyweights in MMA. Ngannou taking on Gagne, or Gain, whatever the guy's name is, however you pronounce it. You know, it's going to be a big-time matchup, man, and I just think they should have did a better job of scheduling this fight. I don't know what the details was as far as scheduling this fight. You know, you got to be able to put these fights on when the venue is available, on a date that is available, and you got other fighters that you're trying to put on for different venues and different dates, and you got the TV dates that are available. So it's a lot of details that I'm not privy to, so maybe this was the only date that they could put on. You know, you got the fighter that wants to fight, he's getting antsy, hey man, I need to be in the ring by this date, this, that, and the third. So they get a lot of things come into play, man. But you know, they should have tried to put this fight on tonight. Put this fight on tonight. You ain't going against nothing but the NBA, and the NBA is in the middle of their season, so you know, one game in an 82-game season is not gonna make or break the average NBA fan. Not to say that the NBA fan follows boxing, but you does have a certain number of boxing and MMA fans. My bad, a certain number of, not only a certain number of boxing and MMA fans, but a certain number of boxing and NBA fans. With all that coming into play, man, I just think they missed the boat on this situation, putting this fight head up with the NFL playoffs. You got Aaron Rodgers going against the San Francisco 49ers, a team that was in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. You're going against UFC 270. It's just not a good scheduling by the PBC and Al Heyman. But we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. But as far as this matchup goes, you got the Matador going against the Bull. This is a great stylistic matchup. That's why I say, man, they should have put this fight on tonight. Put this fight on tonight. I know Showtime usually put their showbox fights on Friday nights. They don't put any type of high-caliber fighters featuring, you know, the top names in boxing that fights under the BBC. They don't like to put them on Friday nights, man. But sometimes you got to make adjustment, man. You see what they did with Gervonta Tank Davis. They put him on a Sunday night, even though he went head up with the NFL too. But they didn't want to go. I guess they didn't want to go head up with. I don't think they had nothing to do with it. You know, you had Devin Haney versus JoJo Diaz on a Saturday. But at the same time, I think they had some kind of comedy showcase featuring Martin going down in Las Vegas during the same time Devin Haney fought JoJo Diaz. So that probably hurt the crowd size for that fight. That's neither here nor there. This matchup is going to be a great stylistic matchup. I think the problem with Magsayo is he has not faced nobody anywhere near the caliber of Gary Russell Jr. When you look at his resume, it's thinner than synthetic oil. Real thin resume. You know, the only guy that I recognized on his resume was Julio Cesar. That was his last fight. And Magsayo is a great body puncher. Great left hook to the body. Good uppercut. He does a good job of closing distance and cutting off the ring. He did a good job of that in the Sayah fight. Now, cutting off the ring with a guy that don't have the footwork or the speed or the movement of a Sayah compared to Gary Russell Jr., because Gary Russell Jr. is a much better mover, way better footwork than Sayah. So it's going to be a whole different ball game trying to close the distance on a Gary Russell like he was successful in his last fight against Sayah. Whole different ball game. It's like going from single A to the major leagues. Big jump. As another thing, Gary Russell Jr. is a guy that's got power in both hands. He's a two-fisted fighter. Got a beautiful straight left hand. He's a southpaw. You know, he fights out of the southpaw stance. A good right hook. Good body puncher. a guy that can punch with you, a guy that's got a beautiful jab. And I think just the hand speed is going to be a big problem with Magsayo. But Magsayo can beat speed with timing. But to me, he's not what you call a great counterpunch. He's a guy that cuts the ring off and he goes to the body. And I think that's going to be the focal point of this fight. Can he cut the ring off? Can he close the distance? And can he get off his body shots? Will Gary Russell tame him with his shots? Because like I said, Gary Russell got respectable power. He ain't got no one hit or quarter power, but he hits hard enough to get his opponent's respect. And he's got power in both hands. Real good puncher, real good sharp puncher, accurate puncher. Guy with a high boxing IQ. He sees what he has to do in a particular fight, and he implements what the strategy he had to do to beat that particular opponent. Very high boxing IQ. So the boxing IQ goes to Gary Russell Jr. The hand speed goes to Gary Russell Jr. Now a lot of people say, well, damn, Gary Russell Jr. has been real inactive. But it don't seem like it hurts any of his. It don't hurt him in his fights. Him being inactive, I haven't watched one Gary Russell fight over the last 3 or 4 years where he been fighting once a year and said, "Damn, man, he look rusty, man. He just don't have the time and he's just off." I ain't never seen that in any of his fights in the last 3 or 4 years. He come back. If you were just looking at him, didn't know his track record, what he's been doing previously, you'd be thinking he fighting 2 or 3 times a year. He doesn't show any kind of rust, and that leads me to believe that he's always in the gym, staying sharp. He does a lot of sparring to stay sharp. And when it comes down to fight night, he's on top of his game. Great fighter. Now, in the only loss of his career against Vasily Lomachenko, that fight started off as a firefight. I was like, "Ooh, man, he boy throwing shots." He was very even probably in the first half of the fight, but toward the middle part of the fight, in the second half of the fight, Lomachenko took over. Now, Gary Russell Jr. was robbed of a knockdown in the 9th round. He hit him with a right hand, I believe, and it was a straight punch. It might have been a left hand, but I believe it was the right hand. He caught him with it, and Lomachenko fell down. And they should have scored a knockdown. Now, Lomachenko was off balance, and he slipped, but he got caught with a punch before he went down, so it should have been scored a knockdown, even though Lomachenko wasn't hurt. So he got robbed of a knockdown. But outside of that, man, in the second half of the fight, man, Lomachenko was steady backing up Gary Russell Jr., working the body. He had Gary Russell just overwhelmed with the technicality and the skill, and he was catching with them straight left hands, man, at will in the second half of that fight. Going to the body, catching with overhand right hands, uppercuts, but he just couldn't miss him with that left hand in the second half of that fight, man. He had Gary Russell bewildered and just overwhelmed with the pace that Lomachenko did. Lomachenko seemed like when he saw that Gary Russell was slowing down, he even put his foot more on the gas. He said, "Okay, you already tired, and I'm already fighting you at a real high rate of speed, but I'm finna go to a breakneck speed." You know what I'm saying? I'm finna go to Indy. I'm finna go from, how these boys be speeding on the freeway? We're finna go from speeding on the freeway to the Indy 500. I'm finna take it to a whole nother level. And he did that, and he just overwhelmed Gary Russell. When you looked at the final punch stats, I think Lomachenko had like 183 punches landed, if I'm not mistaken, and Gary Russell had like 83. I had never seen Gary Russell with that low of a number going 12 rounds with any opponent just landing 83 punches. So they let you know that Lomachenko not only was offensive, but his defense was on point, because I think Gary Russell threw like 800 punches and only landed 83. So he was like, damn near 10%, 8 to 10% of punches landed. That was probably Lomachenko's best performance of his career. Even though that was his 3rd fight, I believe that performance was even better than Nicholas Walters' performance. I even believe that performance was better than the Guillermo Regendahl performance, just because the level of fighter he was fighting at. And like I said, in the first half of that fight, that fight was fought at a very high level in the first 6 rounds. Very high level. Gary Russell was catching with some good shots, good overhand rights, good straight left hands. He was doing a good job of digging to the body at times. It was at a high level, but it's just Gary Russell, for whatever reason, couldn't keep up at that level, and Lomachenko went to a whole nother level than that level was, where it was just nip and tuck, and he just overwhelmed Gary Russell Jr. Besides that, though, Gary Russell Jr. is beating Johnny Gonzalez. He's beating Jojo Diaz. He's beating Patrick Hyland. He's beating some good names on his resume. He beat Nanyam Ball. That was his last fight. He's beat some good names. So this should be a very, very interesting matchup. Magsayo, only chance to win this fight is to cut the ring off and go to the body. Now, he's going to have to go through some fire. Just like when somebody come in your house unannounced and open the front door, they're going to expect some fire to come toward them on the other side of that door. They should expect the cap busted in their ass They coming through a house unannounced. You always tell people that you know, man, hey, man, don't come walking in here unannounced, man. You about to catch a cap in your ass. And that's the one thing that Magsayo gonna have to do, man. He's gonna have to come through the front door knowing there's going to be some bullets coming through on the other side of that door. But he's going to have to be willing to stand in there and still get off his shots and close distance and go to the body. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. But I like Gary Russell to win this fight by unanimous decision over Mark Magsayo. Somewhere around like 8 rounds to 4. I think Magsayo has his moments, especially in the second half of this fight. I think he's kind of had some good moments. But I just think that Gary Russell Jr., who says prior to this fight that he's dealing with a minor injury, but I don't want to hear no excuses. So a lot of people are predicting an upset. But I just don't see it happening, man. I just think the hand speed, the sharpness, the accuracy, the boxing IQ, even if he ain't at 100%, I think it'll be a little bit too much for a guy that's slow-footed, don't have the footwork of Gary Russell Jr., don't have the head movement per se, and just going to be looking to basically implement his size and strength on Gary Russell Jr. And I don't think he's going to be able to do that because Gary Russell Jr. is a guy that's deceptively strong. He's a guy that can hold his own, and he's not easily able to back him up. Kind of like Shakur Stevenson. When opponents think they can bully him, it don't turn out that way when they get in the ring with him. And I think that might be the case with Magsayo and his team. You know, they're expecting to use their power and strength advantage, and I think it could be negated going against a pit bull in Gary Russell Jr. Let me know your thoughts about this particular matchup, who you got in this matchup with Gary Russell Jr. versus Mark Magsayo. Hit the like button if you like the content of this video. Share this video and subscribe to JB Sports, the man, the myth, the legend. And I holla.